Have you ever heard of a creature nearly 10 feet tall, living deep in the Appalachian woods, who doesn't harm people, but quietly helps them? Who clears snow-covered paths for lost families, leaves bundles of firewood on porches, and returns missing children without saying a word? This isn't a legend. It began one crisp autumn morning in 1984 in a tiny town called Sycamore Ridge, nestled deep in western North Carolina. What few people know is this: the people there don't call it a monster. They call it the one who watches over the forest. I've spent the last 3 years collecting forgotten journals, old family stories, and whispers passed down across generations. And what I found were 5 astonishing encounters with something or someone. Not quite human, but deeply humane. In this video, you'll hear the story of Harold Dixon, a 62-year-old widower who didn't believe in Bigfoot until the day he freed one from a hunter's trap and received a silent touch of thanks that changed his life forever. From then on, gifts appeared at his door: fresh corn, polished stones, neatly stacked firewood. A connection was formed, one that lasted a decade. By the end of this story, you may realize Bigfoot isn't the monster we were told to fear. He might be the quiet guardian we never knew we had. But before we begin, where are you watching from today? And what's your name, dear viewer? I'd love to greet you properly in the comments. Let's see how far this story can travel and how many hearts it might reach. If you believe in kindness, in mystery, and in the magic of silent protectors, tap that like button, subscribe, and help us grow a gentle-hearted community that believes Bigfoot might be real. And he might be one of the good ones. Autumn in Sycamore Ridge came like an old song, playing low and steady through the trees. The sugar maples burned red and gold, the kind of color that looked like the forest was exhaling something ancient. A thin veil of morning mist hovered over the valley, softening the outlines of the world, like the edges were not yet awake. Inside a small weathered cabin tucked just off the path, Harold Dixon stood in his kitchen, watching his coffee drip through the filter. The smell of it, earthy, sharp, clung to the wooden walls like a familiar tune. He stood quiet, blinking slow, his back to the stove. His eyes lingered on the small framed photo above the sink. A woman, smiling with wind-blown hair and the kind of eyes that made you want to stay put. His thumb pressed lightly against the edge of the counter as if reaching for a memory he'd held too long. 12 years. He'd measured them in steps down forest trails, in the creak of the porch swing, in the way he still set 2 mugs out every morning, then put one back. Some habits never stopped showing up. The sun was just beginning to cut through the fog as Harold slipped on his old canvas jacket and stepped outside. The air was clean, brisk enough to remind his knees they were 62 and not getting any younger. He started down the narrow trail that curved along the ridge, boots crunching dry leaves, hands in his pockets. Same path, same order. Clear low branches, tug loose wires on the fence, kick a rock here or there into the ditch. Routine was its own kind of prayer. Harold didn't believe in tall tales. Never had. Not Bigfoot, not ghosts, not anything that didn't leave a track, a name, a bill in the mailbox. He believed in things you could hold. Deer were real. Coyotes too. Bears left claw marks. Wolves left hair on fences. Everything else was just late-night nonsense people told to feel important. But then there was the sound. It started as a breath. Deep, ragged. Not animal, not quite human. Somewhere in between. It broke the rhythm of the morning like a dropped plate. Harold paused, his fingers still gripping a fallen branch. He tilted his head, trying to locate it. Nothing but the wind brushing through the maples. He turned back to the fence, but there it was again. A thick, metallic clink, followed by a low, aching sound like pain caught in the throat. He froze. Every instinct told him to ignore it. Old man in the woods hears weird noise, keeps walking, smart, logical. He glanced back toward the cabin, just visible between the trunks. Safe. known. But the noise came again, longer this time, and something in it bent his gut. He moved slow, like a man walking toward a bear trap he couldn't see. He pushed through underbrush, boots silent now, eyes scanning low. The trees parted around a forgotten hollow, choked in bramble and rust-colored leaves. There, caught in the shadows, a figure slumped, tall, too tall, covered in thick, matted brown hair, tangled with burrs and streaked with mud. The shoulder was hunched unnaturally. Harold squinted. That arm, it was wrapped, no, snared in coils of old barbed wire, the kind they'd used for predator fencing decades ago, rusted, sagging, meant to keep things out. Or in. And this thing, it wasn't fighting the wire, it was breathing through it, barely. The smell hit him, metal, old blood, damp forest floor. His stomach turned, but he stayed rooted. Then it looked up, not fast, not like an animal sensing threat. Slow, deliberate. Its eyes met his, not wide, not wild, no growl, no charge, just a plea, quiet, heavy, and human in a way that shouldn't have been possible. Harold staggered back a half step. His mind shouted all the right warnings. But behind that, quieter and deeper, something else stirred. A voice he hadn't heard in 12 years. Don't turn your back on the world, Harold. Don't shrink away from what scares you. His wife had said that, near the end. Her voice barely above a whisper. He hadn't understood it then. Maybe he still didn't. But here it was, looming in fur and blood and barbed wire. He raised both hands, fingers open. I'm not here to hurt you, he whispered, as if it could understand tone better than words. His throat dry, his hands trembling, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a weathered multi-tool. No sudden moves, no rush. The closer he got, the more he could see. Wire biting deep into the creature's arm, fur slick with blood, muscles tense beneath the skin. He knelt, his knees groaning, and slowly began to cut. One loop at a time. The wire snapped back with every snip, slicing the air. The creature flinched once, a low grunt escaping, but it didn't lash out. It shifted weight, breathing through the pain. Its other hand stayed down, fingers curled in the dirt, not clenched, not ready to strike, just holding on. He worked in silence, every cut more difficult. The last strand wrapped near the elbow, deeper, tangled in the thick fur. Harold leaned in, just as the wire slipped and snapped back. His hand jerked, and for a moment he saw it coming, metal recoiling toward his face. But the creature moved first. Its massive body shifted. One broad shoulder slid in between, catching the brunt of the wire. It grunted, breath hot, but didn't strike, didn't shove, just blocked. Harold blinked, stunned. Then, one last pull, and the wire fell away. The creature exhaled, long and shaky. Its arm dropped free, bleeding but intact. Harold stepped back, falling into a crouch, his hands still raised in case. But the creature didn't run. It stood, 8 feet tall, maybe more, built like a tree, but breathing like a man. It looked down at Harold, eyes unreadable in the soft light. And then it reached out, just one hand. Not fast, not hard, just rested it on Harold's shoulder. Warm, heavy, the touch of someone who knew the weight of silence. It held there, a beat, then withdrew. As it turned, something slipped from its side, wooden pieces strung together, worn smooth, shaped by water and time. They landed softly in the leaves. Harold watched it walk into the forest, the red-gold leaves parting for its passage. No panic, no sound but the rustle of trees. When the woods were quiet again, he knelt, hands shaking as he picked up the object. It wasn't trash. It wasn't a trinket. It felt ancient, honored, as if it meant something to the thing that left it. He stood there a long time, the object in his palm, the wind cool against his neck. For the first time in years, he felt part of something. Not just alive, not just enduring, but chosen, seen. The forest no longer felt indifferent. It felt like it was watching. And maybe it always had been. Summer came differently to Sycamore Ridge. It didn't announce itself loudly the way city heat waves did. There were no buzzing air conditioners, no sweat-slicked sidewalks or blaring traffic horns. Instead, it arrived with the slow hum of cicadas and the crisp scent of pine needles warming in the sun. The red and gold of fall had long since faded into rich greens, and the ridge breathed deeper now, alive, humming, as if the forest itself had turned a page. Harold Dixon had changed too. It wasn't something folks in town would have noticed right away. He still kept to himself. Still made the rare supply run in that old Ford truck with the dusty rearview mirror. Still didn't talk much unless you asked something useful. But inside that creaking little cabin of his, tucked behind the split-rail fence and overgrown blackberry thickets, something had shifted. He'd started planting things. Nothing fancy. Just a few rows of corn behind the shed, some pole beans staked with salvaged broom handles, and a little patch of sunflowers leaning like sleepy soldiers along the fence. It wasn't about the food. Not really. It was about rhythm, about tending, about letting something grow again. Inside, hanging quietly by the window above the kitchen sink, was a string of smoothed wood beads, worn from time, strung together with what looked like fiber bark. Harold had found them last fall, right after it happened. He hadn't told a soul, hadn't planned to. The thing, the creature, whatever it was that stood bleeding in the brush and looked at him like it had known pain in the same shape he had, Harold had never forgotten it. Not for one damn day. He hung that string of beads in a place only he could see. It wasn't some superstitious totem. It wasn't a trophy. It was a reminder that there were things in the woods not meant to be understood, but maybe meant to be respected. Things that watched, remembered, and maybe, just maybe, returned a kindness when it counted. That morning, Harold opened the front door with his usual slow push, the old hinge creaking like a sore shoulder. Sunlight spilled across the porch. He squinted against it, rubbed his hands together, and stepped forward, only to stop short. There, beside the third wooden step, the spot where he'd stood all those months ago when that massive hand had rested gently on his shoulder, was a neat stack of firewood, split clean, bone dry, stacked in a way only someone with care and strength would have bothered to do. It stood waist high, not a piece out of place. Harold frowned. He hadn't chopped that, and no neighbor in their right mind would have hauled all the way up his ridge just to leave free labor. It didn't make sense. He walked over, crouched, touched the wood. Dry, too dry for the dew-soaked morning. It had been carried here, protected, delivered. He glanced toward the trees. No movement, no sound except the chirr of insects and the occasional caw of a jaybird. The next morning it was corn, still husked, bright green, laid in a neat little pyramid beside the same step. Clean, no dirt on the ends, picked with care. The kind of ears you might see at a roadside stand, too perfect to be wild, too intentional to be chance. The day after, it was mushrooms, thick-capped, pale brown, the kind that grew only on the north-facing side of old ash trees deep in the forest. Someone, or something, had plucked them and laid them gently on the arm of his porch chair, like an offering left at a shrine. Harold didn't say a word. Not to the wind, not to the woods, not even to himself. But he started watching. That night he pulled the rocker back just enough to sit in the shadows behind the window screen. Lamp off, rifle unloaded and leaning against the far wall. Not because he planned to use it, but because it made the old part of his brain feel steadier. Hours passed. Crickets sang. Frogs echoed from the creek bed below. The wind ticked the sides of the cabin like curious fingers, but nothing came. Still, come dawn, another gift. This time a stack of dry kindling, bundled tight with a twisted vine. Rain had fallen just after midnight, but the bundle was bone dry. Whoever had brought it had waited. Or known? Or both? Harold bent down, lips pressed together. He looked again at the dirt near the edge of the porch, and that's when he saw them. 2 impressions. Long, wide, deeper at the heel than the toe. Too big to be human, not bear, not hoax. No one in town owned feet that damn big or moved that quiet. He exhaled through his nose, slow and deliberate. By the next evening he had something ready. A small cloth sack, stitched together from an old flannel shirt. Inside, he placed a few pieces of his homemade cornbread, 2 strips of smoked bacon from last month's kill, and a little sugar cube from his dwindling stash. He set it down beside the porch step. Same place, same hour. Then he went inside, turned off the lights, sat still. The forest held its breath, and then, just before midnight, something stirred. The sound was low, careful, like someone big moving in a world not built for their size. Not crashing, just present. A faint breath, a pause, the sound of cloth being lifted. He didn't move. Morning light came soft and golden. Harold opened the door with no expectations, but the sack was gone. In its place, on the top step, sat a single stone, smooth, round, polished by water and time, no sharp edges. And not from these woods. It was the wrong kind of mineral. It gleamed faintly in the sun, like it had been waiting to be found. He picked it up, turned it over in his hand. Something about the weight of it felt like intention. That night, he didn't sit in the dark. He stood out on the porch, quiet, hands at his sides. Somewhere in the woods, just beyond the tree line, he thought he saw movement. Tall, still, watching. He didn't wave, didn't speak. He just nodded once, and the shape, if it was there at all, remained until the clouds rolled in and the trees blurred with rain. A few days later, the sky cracked open again. Thunder rolled in from the west, shaking the valley like a drum. Harold stepped out to cover the bean rows with an old tarp, hands stiff and knees arguing with every bend. His boots slipped on the slick wood as he tried to check the gutters. One wrong step. He lost balance. The porch vanished beneath him. His heart jumped. The ground rushed up. But he never hit it. Something yanked him back by the collar. Hard, warm, firm. His back landed against the cabin wall. A second later, he looked up, blinking through the rain. Nothing. Just the swing creaking. The screen door shifting. Wind blowing cold and sharp across the boards. But when he looked down at his flannel shirt, still damp from the storm, he saw it. A print. Not a full hand, not clear, but enough. Wider than his back. Pressed into the wet fabric like a signature. He went inside without a word. Sat at the kitchen table. Looked up at the string of beads in the window. And for the first time in a long time, he said something out loud. If I matter to something like that, maybe I still matter at all. He didn't tell anyone, didn't scribble it down or carve it into wood. Some things weren't meant to be proof. They were meant to be kept, protected. And from that day forward, he left a little more than just food. Sometimes it was a small wooden carving he'd whittled. Sometimes a bit of honey. Once, it was a harmonica. He never saw it again. But he liked the idea that maybe, somewhere deep in the trees, a sound might carry through the dusk that didn't belong to any man. The deal was never spoken, never signed. But it stood, one old man, one forest, and something in between them, walking quiet beneath the leaves. The snow started early that winter, soft at first, like a warning whispered into a quiet town. By the time December rolled around, Sycamore Ridge was sealed in white. Trees stood frozen mid-breath. Fences vanished, and the old road that wound from the far end of the ridge into town might as well have led straight into nowhere. The Sanders family hadn't been here long. Laurie and James had moved into the lower part of the ridge just that past spring, wanting space, wanting quiet, wanting something slower than the clatter of Denver traffic and neighborhood lawnmowers. They brought with them the kind of hope young families carry in boxes with baby blankets and rocking chairs. Their son, Micah, had been born in August. Came early. Tiny thing. Barely cried, just blinked up like he was already figuring the world out. Now, in the belly of winter, that house. small, new to the mountain, still smelling of pine boards and clean paint. Felt like it belonged to someone else. The cold had teeth. The radio crackled with weather reports that started sounding more like warnings. Then the power blinked. Once, then again, and then it was gone. By the third day of snow, they knew they were in trouble. The fireplace helped, not enough. They'd stocked firewood, but only enough for a week, maybe less if the winds kept pushing in from the north. James stayed up feeding the fire by hand. Lori wrapped Micah in layers, 2, then 3 blankets. His lips were starting to pale. She watched him constantly, every breath, every small shift. They had no phone line. The road was buried in a drift taller than their mailbox, and the idea of walking for help felt like a suicide pact. That night, James stood by the front window, arms crossed, watching snow swirl like ghosts across the ridge. The fire behind him crackled low. Lori slept on the floor, Micah tucked close to her chest. He could hear her breathing, short and shallow. Hear the wind whistling through the eaves. He clenched his jaw and made a decision. If it cleared by morning, he would walk. The thought scared him. He didn't let it show. He closed the curtain and turned back toward the hearth, just as something shifted outside. Not wind, not snow. A sound, low, weighted, rhythmic, almost patient. He stopped moving, stared at the door. It came again. Not footsteps exactly. More like something heavy sliding across snow, circling the house. Slow, intentional. He waited. Lori stirred behind him. "What's wrong?" "Shh," he said quietly, but not out of fear, out of instinct. Like speaking too loud might change something delicate. They listened. The sound faded. They said nothing. By morning, the storm had stopped. James pulled on boots still damp from the last attempt at the shed. He stepped outside and froze. A path. Not natural, not random, not wine-carved. A clean, deliberate path, wide enough for 2 grown adults to walk shoulder to shoulder, was carved through the snow. It stretched from their porch, curved down the embankment, and disappeared into the lower tree line, the direction of the old trail to town. And beside the door, stacked waist-high, dry and perfect, was firewood. He knelt, touched it. It was warm from the sun. He turned back inside, wordless. Lori looked at him, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "There's a way out," he said softly. She didn't question it, just nodded. He wrapped Micah like a bundle of glass, double-blanketed, held him close to his chest. "I'll go," he said. "You stay here. Keep the fire alive." She stood at the door and watched him step into the snow-lined corridor, baby in arms. For a long moment, she didn't breathe. The air was silent, but not empty. He started walking. Every step on the compacted path felt like walking inside a story he didn't understand. It was too precise. The walls of snow on either side were shoulder-high, and it didn't just lead down. It curved where the slope turned. It banked gently where the forest deepened, like someone had walked it dozens of times before. Half a mile in, he stopped. The forest beside him was still, but something moved. He turned his head. Just trees, but then a shift, barely there, as if something large was walking beside him. But inside the tree line, staying just out of sight. He swallowed. Kept walking. Micah stirred against his chest, but didn't cry. That alone gave James more strength than anything else could have. At the next bend, he paused again. The sound was back. Heavy steps, but not coming closer, just matching him. Like shadowing, like escort. He looked again, saw nothing. He didn't speak, didn't run. Kept walking, and when the trail opened up toward the edge of the service road that connected Sycamore Ridge to the town below, he saw them. 3 men in orange parkas, carrying emergency packs, shouting his name. He stood stunned. One of them grabbed his arm, eyes wide. "How the hell did you get here? The ridge is buried." James turned, lips parted, meaning to explain. But the trail behind him was empty. The path still there, but the edges already softening. melting into wind and snow. The tracks beside it, fading, like they'd never been there. Back at the house, Lori had watched him go until the trees swallowed the trail. Then she kept the fire going. Micah's blanket still smelled of cedar and milk. The wind rattled the glass. She thought about the night before, about the sound of something large pacing the outer wall. She never saw it. But sometime after James had left, when the wind had died and the smoke rose straight into the sky, she stepped outside for more wood. The porch was swept clean, and the snow around the cabin was marked. Not footprints, but prints, wide, long, moving in a deliberate circle. Once, twice, 3 full loops, as if something had been watching, guarding. She never told anyone about it, not even James. But when he came back, tired and trembling, Micah warm and safe in his arms, she kissed his forehead and whispered, "Someone's looking out for us." He didn't ask who. He didn't need to. Years later, that winter still lived in them. They never moved from the ridge. And every first snow, Lori would leave a small plate of cornbread and dried berries at the edge of the woods behind their home. No one ever took it while she watched. But by morning, it was always gone. The forest, it seemed, remembered things, and some debts didn't need words. Just the silence between falling snow and the space where no tracks should have been. Spring in Sycamore Ridge didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly, like someone knocking gently at the edge of winter's long silence. One morning, you'd notice the snow melt dripping from the eaves. A few days later, green would whisper from the forest floor. Then one soft breeze would carry the unmistakable scent of thawed bark and damp soil. And you knew the woods had turned their page. Lucy Marin was 10 the year the hickory trees started to wake early. She lived with her mother on the low eastern slope, where the forest bent into the edge of the valley, and the dirt road curled like a ribbon half buried in leaves. Their house was small, 2 rooms, a porch held up by uneven beams, and a narrow chimney that never quite learned to pull smoke the right way. Her mother, Carla, worked long hours in town, waiting tables at the diner near the train tracks. That left Lucy plenty of time to wander. And she did. She didn't fit with the kids in town. Not really. They laughed at the drawings she kept in her notebooks, said they were weird. Who draws tree bark and rock patterns and knots in wood? Who brings moss to class in a jar and writes stories about shadows that live behind stumps? They didn't see what she saw. Behind their house, past a collapsed barbed wire fence and through a tangle of hickory and chestnut saplings, ran a narrow deer path that led to a shallow stream. Lucy had found it the first week they moved in. She followed it every afternoon, past a fallen log that smelled like mushrooms and into a grove where the air always felt cooler, quieter. That's where she brought her sketchbook. That's where she felt watched, but not in a scary way. One Tuesday, the kind where the air was thick with rain that hadn't yet fallen, she found something strange beside her usual rock. A branch, maybe 10 inches long, smooth as driftwood, no bark. The edges rounded, worn down like it had been polished by water for years, though the nearest river was miles away. She held it in her hand, turned it over. It was warm somehow. She didn't know why. It looked ordinary but didn't feel that way. She didn't tell her mother. She didn't tell anyone. She took it home, placed it beside her pillow. That night, she dreamed of wind moving through tall trees and something large moving just behind it, quiet, careful, gentle. The next day, it rained, a soft drizzling kind that made the woods smell like a freshly opened book. Lucy walked the trail anyway. She carried her old backpack, worn at the seams, her pencils tucked inside a pencil roll she'd made from scrap denim. She found her usual spot at the base of the wide hickory trunk. The bark had deep grooves that reminded her of old faces. She sat down, pulled her sketch pad out, and started drawing. Out of the corner of her eye, something shifted. At first, she thought it was a trick of the rain, branches moving, light catching wet leaves. But then she saw it. Between 2 trunks, about 30 yards out, stood a shape. Tall, upright, still. It didn't move, didn't try to hide. She blinked, her pencil frozen above the paper. The shape didn't vanish. It simply stepped back, behind one of the trunks, leaving just enough of its outline visible. Not like it wanted to disappear, but like it was waiting. She sat still for a long time. Then, slowly, she closed her sketchbook, put her pencil down, and stood. She didn't approach. She just picked a long strand of green grass, looped it into a circle, wove in 3 small violets, and set it on the large rock near the stream's bend. She stepped back, waited. Nothing happened. She left. The next morning she returned. The grass circle was gone. In its place, beside the same rock, sat 2 wild strawberries. Bright, red, perfect. She knew every berry bush within a mile. These were bigger than any she'd seen. They were laid gently, side by side, as if placed with care. Her heart beat faster, but not from fear. She felt seen, picked, chosen. The next day, she brought a gift. She took one of her corn-husk dolls, something she'd made the winter before, and added tiny features with charcoal. 2 dots for eyes, a soft curve for a mouth. She tied it with twine, wrapped it gently in a leaf, and placed it on the same rock. "For you," she whispered, her voice barely carrying past the leaves. "If you're real." The following morning, the doll was gone. In its place were 2 river stones, smooth, rounded, one larger, one small, positioned side by side, a pair. She stared at them, then sat cross-legged in the moss and drew the moment. Later that week, she made the mistake of telling someone. Not everything, just enough to invite ridicule. At recess, she'd mentioned she had a friend in the woods. A big one, a quiet one. That was all it took. They called her Forest Freak. Tree Troll Girl. They followed her after school, whispering, giggling, daring each other to say things louder. She ignored it. She always did. But one day they followed too far. 4 of them, kids from her class. They trailed behind her on the deer path, laughing, throwing small rocks, mocking her drawings, calling her names that didn't even sting anymore, until one of them shoved her. Not hard, but just enough. Her foot slipped. The edge of the trail gave way. She felt herself fall. It happened fast. A sharp pull of gravity, her backpack dragging her down the slope, her hands scrambling for roots that gave way in wet dirt. And then something stopped her. Not the ground, not a tree, a hand. Large, warm, furred. It grabbed the back of her coat, held tight, and pulled. She gasped. She didn't scream. She turned. She only caught a glimpse. Not the full face, not the eyes. Just the chest, a hand, a breath. And then it was gone, back into the trees. She stood there shaking, not from fear, from something else, like awe. She climbed back to the trail, knees muddy, elbows scraped. The other kids were gone, cowards. She didn't cry. She walked home and didn't tell her mother. That night she drew again. In the middle of her page, she sketched a small girl in a coat too big for her frame. Behind her stood a figure, broad, tall, kind. Not a monster, not a man, just something ancient, watching. That picture stayed with her for years. Not in her backpack, not in a frame, but somewhere quiet. Inside the part of her heart that still believed the world had magic if you knew where to look. In that forest, under those trees, something had chosen to be gentle. And even as she grew, as her mother got promoted and they moved into a slightly better house closer to the town line, she never stopped walking those woods, never stopped looking. And some spring mornings, she'd find the tiniest bouquet of violets waiting near that same stone. Paired stones beside them, always 2, always together. She never saw the shape again, but she knew it was there, and that was enough. The first thing Caleb Wright noticed that morning was how quiet the trees had become. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The kind that left space between every sound. Like the forest itself was holding something back. He stood on the western slope of Sycamore Ridge, axe resting against his hip, hard hat tilted back just enough to show the fine sheen of sweat on his brow. The others were laughing down by the trucks, unpacking sandwiches and swapping deer stories. But Caleb stayed still, his eyes fixed on the tree in front of him. Not because it was the biggest or the most valuable, but because something about the dirt around it felt wrong. It was too soft, damp in a way the rest of the hillside wasn't. A few moss patches had peeled away near the roots, like the earth had shifted. He cleared his throat and wiped a hand over his jaw. Said nothing, just like always. Caleb had been working in the woods for nearly 15 years, long enough to know when not to speak up. The foreman that day was Ed Janes, an impatient man with a gut like a steel drum and a clipboard that could cut a man down quicker than a chainsaw. Ed didn't like questions. He liked production, and Caleb wasn't in the mood to explain why his gut said no. He marked the base anyway, stepped back, took a breath. 15 years, and still, the sound of a tree falling made his stomach knot. Because when he was 19, and everything still felt like it was going to work out, he'd taken his little brother into the woods behind their grandfather's house. Just a short hike. Just to show him how to start a fire without matches. Just to prove he could be the kind of man their father never was. But a tree came down too fast, too wrong. Cracked at the base, wet rot no one saw coming. It didn't kill his brother, but it broke his spine, left him in a chair for life. And Caleb never forgave himself. He'd spent the next decade listening for the creak before the crash. The warning sound most folks missed. Some nights he still woke up in sweat, swearing he heard it again. Branches twisting, wind pulling, that horrible final crack. So now, here in the western woods, staring at a tree with damp roots and no good feeling behind it, Caleb took 2 steps to the left, then 3 more. He saw a thick piece of wood resting against the base of a nearby maple, old, worn, placed at an angle that looked too deliberate to be random. Like someone or something had meant for it to be found. He moved again, and when the chainsaw bit through the tree's belly and the trunk started to lean, he saw the fall line shift. The tree didn't go where it was supposed to. It landed hard, right where he had been standing. Had he not moved, it would have crushed him. He felt the air leave his chest as he watched the branches bounce. His heart pounded so loud he thought someone else might hear it. But no one did. Down below, the others cheered. Another tree down, another mark off the list. Caleb just stood there. He looked down at the spot where the tree had landed, then at the fallen piece of wood behind him, then past the slope. And that's when he saw it. Not clear, not close, but enough. A shape, tall and wide, stood halfway up the next ridge, half shielded by trees. It didn't move, didn't run, just stood, watching. And then, in one slow turn, it stepped behind the trees and disappeared. Caleb's throat tightened. He didn't tell anyone, just picked up his axe and walked slow back to the truck. Later that day, he doubled back during break. Told the crew he'd dropped his gloves near the upper trail. Truth was, he couldn't shake the feeling in his gut. That same feeling from years ago, when something terrible had almost happened. When the world pulled the curtain back for just a second and let you see what was waiting underneath. He walked alone into the trees, boots crunching against old pine needles and loose rock. And he found it again, the figure, closer this time. Not moving, not threatening, just waiting. The same wide body, the same silent presence. Fur the color of old chestnuts, arms like logs, and eyes, he saw them now, dark, unreadable, and not afraid. It turned, walked slowly up a side trail Caleb hadn't noticed before. A deer path, maybe, but smoother. It didn't gesture, but it didn't run. So Caleb followed. He didn't know why. He walked for 20 minutes, deeper into the woods than he'd ever gone on that side of the ridge. The air got cooler, quieter. The trees grew closer together. And then he saw it, a tree, taller than the rest, cracked at the base and leaning just enough to seem stable. But the inside was hollow, rotted clean. If someone had tried to cut it, it would have snapped. Hard. Wrong. On the trunk, carved deep into the bark, were marks. Not letters, not scratches, symbols, wide and deliberate. Crossed lines, arrows, like a warning. like something saying, "Not here." He turned back, but the figure was already gone. The wind carried no sound, just the deep breath of a forest that felt alive in ways he'd never understood. He made his way back, heart thudding with every step. Later that afternoon, the foreman marked that same hollow tree for cutting. Caleb didn't say a word. He just quietly moved the tape. Said they needed to resurvey that area. Nobody questioned him. The next day it rained, the kind of cold rain that made bark peel and hillsides slick. Caleb was on the south face of the ridge, checking gear near a steeper slope. His boot caught. He slid hard, knees scrambling, palms out. He grabbed a bush, too thin, roots too shallow. The ground gave. He felt the world tilt. Then something yanked him back, not violently, with force, but with care. A thick vine twisted around his shoulder and pulled. He landed on his back, breath knocked out of him. He looked up, just in time to see a silhouette melt into the trees again. The shoulders, the chest, the low grunt, gone before he could shout. He lay there a long time. The rain hit his face. His hands trembled, but not from cold. He was 37 years old, built like an oak, had scars on both arms and a rib that never healed right. But in that moment, he felt like a boy again, standing over his brother's broken body, wishing he could take it all back. That night he didn't go home right away. He walked to the edge of the forest where no one logged anymore, found a patch of soft earth near a stand of young trees, dug a small hole, just with his hands, and he planted something, a sapling, no taller than his knee, the kind his brother used to point out on hikes. He didn't say anything, didn't pray, just covered it, patted the earth flat, and walked away. It wasn't forgiveness, not really, but maybe it was a start. Something had seen him, helped him, twice, and maybe, just maybe, not everything in the woods was meant to be cut down. Maybe some things were meant to be left standing, even the broken ones. The ridge hummed with summer. That kind of hum you only heard if you stopped everything else. The whir of insects, distant chirp of tree frogs, the soft crackle of dry leaves under deer hooves. And somewhere in that layered music, the trees listened, the way they always had. It was the weekend of April's 7th birthday, and 3 families had driven up from town to spend the night in the clearing just above Sycamore Ridge. They pitched their tents in a semicircle near the fire ring. 2 dads setting up poles, 1 mom stringing a nylon tarp between trees in case it rained. April wore a flower crown someone had made her. She didn't take it off, not even to run. She darted between coolers and lawn chairs, her bare feet thumping over pine needles and the occasional flat rock, calling out to the other kids like her voice was part of the wind. The campfire came alive after dark. Someone roasted hot dogs. A guitar came out, strings out of tune, but nobody cared. One father passed around marshmallows the size of baby fists, and the kids jabbed them on sticks and fought over who could get theirs the most golden without burning it black. Laughter curled up into the sky like smoke. Parents sat back with beers and light sweaters, letting the moment stretch like good rope. For a while, everything felt exactly the way it should, until someone made a joke. It was just a passing thing, one of the dads nudging the fire with a stick and saying, "Better hope Bigfoot doesn't smell those marshmallows." The kids laughed. The parents chuckled. Somebody said, "You mean Harold's forest friend?" with a wink, because people still remembered. They remembered the story from 2 years back, when April had been found cradled in her father's arms at the edge of a snowpath no one remembered clearing. Some still said it had been a ranger. Others said a dream. Nobody argued too loudly, because Harold Dixon had still been alive then, and Harold never said a damn word either way. Now, years later, with Harold getting older and quieter, the stories lived only in the spaces between people's sentences. They weren't talked about directly, but they lived there, just under the skin. April didn't laugh at the joke. She just kept her eyes on the tree line. Later, after the last ember cracked and someone blew out a lantern, the kids played one more game, hide and seek in the dark. Parents laid out rules. Stay close to the fire. Don't go beyond the big stump. No crossing the dry creek bed. Everyone nodded. But April had her own idea. She snuck off just before the counting started, barefoot and fast, running low through the tall grass until the sound of voices behind her faded into crickets. She crawled behind a fallen log halfway down the slope and pressed her cheek to the cool bark, listening. Her breath caught in her throat from the thrill. She imagined her friends counting and calling, unable to find her. She smiled. Then she waited. The woods creaked with the usual sounds. Nothing sharp, nothing scary. Then the air shifted. She looked up. Someone was calling her name. Not her friends, not any grown-ups. The voice was low, steady, too far away to hear clearly. She sat up. A shadow passed behind the trees. Not fast, not loud, but big. Too big. April didn't scream. She stood slowly, backing away from the log, her hands still smudged with dirt from the hiding spot. She turned and found herself face to chest with something that wasn't supposed to be real. She couldn't see the eyes, just the shape of a massive form, standing still, breathing like the forest itself. She stared up, frozen. Then a sound broke the stillness. From higher up, the camp, a mother yelling. Then more yelling. Flashlights dancing between trees. Chaos. The form didn't flinch. Instead, it bent. April's breath caught. Huge arms came forward, palms open. Then it lifted her. Not roughly, not quickly, just as if it had done this before. She didn't struggle. Something about it, the warmth, the smell of moss and bark and something old, made her still. Her tiny hands found the coarse fur near its neck, and she held on. It walked, not toward the tents, but back toward the clearing. She could see the flicker of firelight now. Parents pacing, lights bobbing like search parties. Someone shouting her name again. And then it stepped just far enough into the edge of the clearing that the light hit them both. Gasps erupted. Mothers screamed. A flashlight dropped to the ground. The thing set April down on her feet. She turned to look up at it. It looked back, and then took one step backward, then another, slow. The fire threw light across its face. And they saw it. Not an ape, not a bear. A face with deep lines. Tired, curious, but not angry. Eyes that shimmered like they had seen more winters than the ridge itself. It placed a hand on its own chest for a second, then lowered it. One father raised his hunting rifle. He'd brought it just in case, though no one had expected to use it. He aimed, and in that breathless second, another voice cut through. Harold's voice. Older now, ragged, but clear. Don't. He stepped forward from the shadows beyond the tents, where he'd been sitting alone near a stump, nursing an old cup of coffee, away from the noise. He didn't yell, just said it again, firmer. Put it down. The man's hands trembled, then lowered. The thing, whatever it was, held still, then nodded, once, and disappeared into the woods like it had never been there. April ran to her mother, but she kept glancing back, even as she was held, even as her name was sobbed into her hair. She looked toward the trees like she was saying thank you. Later, after the fire had burned low again and the kids were tucked away in sleeping bags with too many questions and not enough answers, the adults sat in a circle. No one said what they'd seen, but no one said it wasn't real either. One mother cried softly. One father didn't touch his rifle again for the rest of the night. Harold sat by himself, staring at the trees, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone in the knowing. He didn't have to convince anyone anymore. Whatever pact he'd once made in silence, that pact had kept him company long enough. Now someone else had seen, and that was enough, at least for now. In the years to come, people told the story different ways. Some said it was a trick of the fire. Others said a prank with a costume, but not one of the children who'd been there that night ever laughed about Bigfoot again. They didn't fear the woods, but they respected them, especially April. Every birthday after that, she asked for the same thing, a night under the stars, near the same clearing, where the wind moved like breath, and something more than wind might still be listening. The snow came in early that year, creeping quiet across the ridge like it remembered something the rest of the world had forgotten. It dusted the chimney tops and made the branches bow under its soft weight. By the second week of December, Sycamore Ridge had turned white, silent, almost sacred. The kind of silence that felt full of memory. Of footsteps no longer taken. Of names no longer spoken out loud. Harold Dixon turned 72 that winter. His body had softened in ways that betrayed him. His knees no longer trusted the trail to the well. His hands trembled just enough to make tying a bootlace a small battle. But he still rose at the same hour each morning, when the sky was just starting to pale behind the trees, and stood at the window with his coffee, nodding once to the world like a man showing respect to an old friend. He touched the same two things every morning, the string of smooth wooden beads hanging just above the window frame. Dusty now, but still intact. And the stone, round, river-worn, placed beside it on the window sill like a sentinel. Not local, not found by accident. He still remembered the weight of it in his palm the first time. Remembered how it had been offered, not dropped. He never told anyone the full story. Not even Caleb when he came by to drop off firewood or check the old generator before a storm. Not even Lucy, who still visited from time to time with sketches and the kind of quiet eyes that saw more than they said. Harold didn't speak of that day in 1984. The fence, the blood. The breath of something ancient that had stood eye to eye with him and hadn't turned away. Because by now he knew some things weren't meant to be explained. They were meant to be carried. The ache started in his hip just after Thanksgiving. By the first week of December, it had crept down to his thigh, and he found himself wincing every time he bent to lift the bucket from the well. Still, he kept on. He moved slow but steady. He told himself the forest had seen worse. The morning it happened was clear. Cold enough to make the breath curl from his mouth in white ribbons. Harold put on his thickest coat, double-wrapped his scarf, and pulled the old metal bucket from the hook. He stepped onto the porch, boots crunching over the thin crust of ice that had settled overnight. He didn't see the patch of black ice near the base of the steps. His foot slid. The bucket flew from his hand, clattering into the frost-bitten grass. And Harold hit the ground hard. The crack was loud, too loud to be imagined. He didn't scream, didn't curse. He just lay there, staring up at the pale sky, breath coming in short, visible clouds. His leg throbbed. Something deep inside had shifted. He knew it without needing a doctor to tell him. The bone was broken. He wasn't getting up on his own. He tried to sit up, failed. He called out once, voice thin and hoarse, but there was no one around. No one to hear. No mail delivery today. Caleb wouldn't be back until Saturday. The nearest neighbor wasn't within shouting distance. The cold began to seep through his coat. He closed his eyes. Not to sleep, just to let the pain drift. Memories came soft as snow. He saw his wife standing in the cabin doorway, smiling with a dish towel in her hand. He saw the creature, bleeding at the fence, its eyes locked with his. He saw April, cradled at the edge of the firelight, looking up at the trees with something like faith in her face. And then the sound came, not loud, not hurried, just steady, a slow, deep rhythm of snow compacting under weight. Harold opened his eyes. The sky above him was the color of unwashed glass. And then that sky dimmed, blocked by something massive. It leaned in, and in that moment, Harold didn't flinch, because it wasn't fear he felt. It was recognition. Two arms, wide and fur-covered, reached down. One cupped beneath his shoulders, the other tucked carefully beneath his legs. There was no jolt, no sudden pull, just a lift, as if he weighed nothing at all. As if this had been practiced, as if this had been expected. Harold blinked against the breeze as it brushed past his face, snowflakes landing soft on his cheeks. He turned his head just enough to see the curve of its chest. And there, hanging from a loop of cord near the collarbone, was the same string of beads he had once held in his hand long ago. It had kept them all these years, carried it like a token, like memory, like proof. The cabin came back into view, blurred behind the weight of snow and age. The porch looked further away than it ever had. The creature didn't climb the steps. It crossed the porch in 3 strides and laid Harold down carefully on the mat beside the door. Then it turned, began stacking thick pieces of wood and old fence panels against the side wall, forming a crude barrier against the wind. It worked with patience, with hands that understood the shape of need. When it finished, it looked once more at Harold, then walked to the edge of the clearing and circled. Once, twice, 3 full laps, each step wide, deliberate, as if drawing a ring of protection no one else would ever see. Then it disappeared into the trees, just as the sound of tires crackled down the frozen path. Caleb. Harold heard the engine before he saw the truck. Voices, footsteps. The door burst open, a shout, then hands, warmth. He was lifted again. This time by people who didn't understand what had just happened, who looked at the tracks and thought of bears, or wind, or tricks of snow. Inside the cabin, someone noticed the stone. It had been moved, placed back beside the wooden beads, right at the center of the table. No one touched it. Not then. At the hospital, Harold drifted in and out of sleep. He didn't speak much. The nurses said he was lucky to be alive, that someone had found him just in time. But Harold didn't correct them. He just smiled, one corner of his mouth lifting the way old men do when they know more than they say. On his 3rd morning in the ward, a nurse brought him coffee in a chipped white mug. He sipped, slow and careful, then whispered, not to her, not even to himself, "We're even now, you and me." And somewhere out there, beneath the snow-covered canopy of Sycamore Ridge, the forest held its breath a little tighter, because it remembered too. The ground softened again that spring. Not all at once, never that fast in a place like Sycamore Ridge. First it was the birds, waking earlier than usual. Then the tips of crocuses poking through the crust of old snow, defiant and purple. Then the fog lifted one morning and never quite returned, like even it knew the time for stillness had passed. They buried Harold Dixon on a quiet Thursday, just after Easter. No big speeches, just the smell of wet dirt, the rustle of wind in the pines, and a circle of people who had never once heard him raise his voice. Some were older, some were young enough to fidget through the service. But they came, because even silence, when lived right, leaves an echo behind. Lucy Marin was there. She wore a soft blue jacket that brushed against her knees and held a small sketchbook at her side like it was part of her. She was 21 now, studying illustration at a small liberal arts college 2 towns over. But she still came back every season, still walked the edge of the stream near her childhood home, still left little circles of wild grass and violets by the stone she once thought no one else noticed. Caleb Wright stood near the back of the group. His face looked older than his age, not from time, but from weight. A weight he'd long since stopped trying to name. He didn't speak during the burial, but when the crowd started to drift back to their cars, he lingered, his hands jammed in his coat pockets, eyes fixed on the mound of earth like it was still breathing. He wasn't the only one who stayed. April was there too, 14 now. Quiet in the way only those who've seen something they weren't supposed to ever really become. She didn't cry. She just stood near the tree line, as if waiting for something she couldn't explain to arrive late. No one mentioned what they remembered. No one brought up the stories that had once passed in whispers, about tracks too wide to be human, about paths cleared through snow, about firelight and enormous hands that never harmed. But no one denied them either, because by now, the town had stopped needing proof. Instead, they made new habits. After every harvest, someone would leave a small bundle of corn or squash just beyond the last fence on Ridge Trail. If the wind was kind, the bundle would be gone by morning. On the 4th of July, a few families would bake extra pies and set one on a stump behind the Sanders property. If it rained that night, the pie would stay dry. Every single time. No one explained it. No one wrote it down. They just did it. Not everyone believed, of course. There were still teenagers who joked, still old-timers who rolled their eyes. But even they didn't hunt past the old logging line. They didn't light fires deeper than the 2nd ridge. And they didn't mock the quiet. It wasn't fear, not really. It was respect. The night of Harold's burial, the fog rolled in late, thicker than usual. A few folks stayed back to finish the coffee and banana bread set out on folding tables by the church ladies. Someone lit a lantern and forgot to turn it off before leaving. And just after 10, as the last car pulled away down the winding dirt road, someone looked back toward the woods and paused. There, just past the first break in the trees, stood something tall, unmoving, framed by mist and moonlight. It didn't step forward. It didn't wave. It just stood, watching. Then slowly, barely shifting, it turned and was gone. The next morning, Caleb returned to the gravesite before the sun had fully crested the ridge. He stood alone, hands bare, the morning chill biting at his knuckles. He looked down at the simple wooden marker. It read, Harold Dixon, 1922 to 1998. A good neighbor. That was all. But something was different. Right at the head of the grave, nestled in the fresh soil like it had always been there, was a stone. Rounded, smooth, clean. He picked it up, rolled it in his palm. It was the same kind. Same weight, same feel. And he knew. Somewhere in the woods, someone else had said goodbye. Later that week, Lucy sat with the old librarian, Mrs. Fenley, who'd known Harold longer than most. They talked about books, about trail maps, about coffee, and how nobody made it quite as bitter as Harold did. And then, when the sky started to dim, and the air took on that golden, heavy color that only came before summer thunderstorms, Mrs. Fenley leaned in and said, almost to herself, "It's not new, you know. Whatever that thing is, it's been walking these ridges longer than any of us. We just chose not to bother it." Lucy didn't ask what she meant. She just nodded, because something in her already knew. The forest had rules. Not written, not spoken, but lived. You don't shoot what isn't hunting you. You don't point where someone's watching in peace. And you never ever brag. It had always been a kind of quiet pact. One generation passed it on to the next. Not with stories, but with gesture. With silence. With eyes that told more truth than mouths ever could. Now it was April's turn. One afternoon, her mother found her sitting alone near the edge of the back pasture, just before the tree line. She was sketching something in the dirt with a stick. Her shoes were off, her legs tucked beneath her. When asked what she was doing, she said calmly, "There's a tall friend who watches me when I walk home." Her mother didn't panic, didn't dismiss. She just sat beside her and said, "If you ever see him again, you be kind, and don't go too close." April nodded. She already understood. That spring, more paths were cleared in the underbrush than usual. Little trails that curved naturally, as if following wind or water, not man-made logic. Small stacks of river stones appeared along the deeper trails, always paired. One large, one small. Hikers found fresh kindling even after rain. Families found wildflowers laid carefully on porch steps in bundles too neat to be accidents. And the town changed, not fast, not loud, but steady. It became a place that looked out for its trees, that mended fences without being asked, that left salt licks in winter where they might do the most good. They didn't need signs. They had memory. They had story. They had the rhythm of something bigger than themselves, walking beside them. Years later, when another child asked why no one ever built deeper into the ridge, an old man smiled and said, "Because someone already lives there." And that was enough. In the final scene of a life not written down, but deeply known, something stood at the top of the ridge just after dusk. Tall, still, watching. Below, the town glowed soft with porch lights and chimney smoke. A child tossed a smooth river stone into the air and caught it with both hands, laughing. The wind moved through the trees like a voice too old to need words. And the figure, whatever it was, turned back into the forest, unseen, unneeded, but still there, like it always had been and always would be. Some stories aren't meant to be explained. They're meant to be felt, quietly, like the hush of snow falling through pines, like the stillness between heartbeats when something deep inside you shifts, and you know without knowing that the world just became a little more meaningful. This was never just a story about forest shadows or distant footsteps. It was about something older than fear and bigger than proof. About the invisible thread that connects us when we choose kindness over suspicion, presence over power, silence over spectacle. Because sometimes the most powerful things in life aren't loud. They don't crash through the world demanding to be seen. They don't show up in photographs or sit neatly on a map. Sometimes they simply exist, quietly, patiently, waiting for us to become the kind of people who can see them, who can deserve them. And maybe that's the heart of it. The sacred exchange between trust and restraint, between knowing something beautiful exists and choosing not to ruin it by dragging it into the light. We live in a world obsessed with capturing, naming, owning. But maybe some wonders are meant to remain free. Maybe mystery is a form of respect. Maybe believing without demanding is one of the last true acts of grace we still have. And perhaps, in the end, the question isn't whether something walks those woods or whether the legends are true. Perhaps the better question is, what kind of person are you when you think no one's watching? What do you choose to leave behind when there's nothing to gain? How do you treat the unseen, the unheard, the ones who can't speak for themselves? Because every trail we walk, every gesture we make, every choice to be gentle or not, it echoes. Sometimes in ways we'll never know. Sometimes in footprints we'll never see. But it matters. Always. So if this story left something with you, maybe a feeling you can't quite name, hold on to it. Let it settle in. Let it shape how you move through the world. With softness, with listening, with wonder. And maybe, just maybe, when the world grows quiet and the stars come out, you'll hear something too. Not a roar, not a whisper. Just the deep, ancient truth that we're never truly alone. Not when we live with open hearts and leave space for mystery. Thank you for walking this path with us. If the story moved you, we'd love to know. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let us hear your heart. And if you'd like to be part of more journeys like this one, consider subscribing and following the channel. One story can change a life. One act of listening can awaken something long asleep. We're grateful you were here. And who knows? Maybe somewhere, someone else is too.